Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Storytellers Stage for our Immersive Technology panel. We're going to be discussing how immersive technology and storytelling can be strange bedfellows or a partnership to create astonishing experiences. And I'm joined here today by three lovely people who are all involved in this wonderful world that we live in of immersive media. To my left here, obviously, Kim-Leigh Pontin, who's the Creative Interaction Director of Sky VR Studios. I also have Martin Williams, who's the Creative Director and founder of Talesmith and Flyride Films. And I have Gideon Beresford, who is a director and the head of post-production at Banana Studios. So rather than me talk about what they do, I thought it'd be nice if they could actually explain what they do themselves, rather than me say something I shouldn't be saying. So Kim-Leigh, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi. Hello, everyone. I'm Kim-Leigh Pontin. I'm Creative Interaction Director at Sky VR Studios. The interesting bit of my title is the interaction bit. So I'm really interested in creating immersive, fully immersive experiences, so 6 degrees of freedom mainly, with interactive components to it, whether that's in sports or drama or other, but ways of using techniques like volumetric capture, and using gaming engines like Unity to create an interactive experience.
Hi everybody, I'm Martin. I'm founder of Talesmith and Flyride Films. I come from background in directing high-end natural history and science documentaries. Did quite a few projects for Sky in 3D with David Attenborough, and off the back of that, established Talesmith as a production company in its own right, and we really are an extension of what I used to do as a director, so natural history, science for broadcast, working on a project for Smithsonian Channel at the moment. We did a big project for the BBC about Tyrannosaurus Rex recently, and we also have run a second company called Flyride Films, which really specializes in a very niche, interactive, immersive format where we create giant screen ticketed experiences for paying audiences, particularly in China, where you get to have an aerial journey over a landscape and really get to take in the view of the whole landscape in front of a giant screen with moving seating, so you feel like you're flying over the landscape. And I've also been involved in a few VR and projects, including Hold the World with David Attenborough, which is a Sky project, and a short film called Fly Spy. So that's me in a nutshell.
Cool, and I'm Gideon. I'm a director at Banana Studios. I specialize in post-production and branded content and creating videos for brands online. And more I find myself making 360 virtual reality videos for brands, FMCGs, NGOs, that kind of thing, and just trying to create video solutions for brands to express themselves and their core messages.
Thank you. Just to, something I should have said earlier, this is an interactive discussion, and you are encouraged to ask questions, which I have a little iPad here which will feed through. Keep them nice. There's a URL at the bottom there, glsr.it/BVE18. If you'd like to go to that, you can send us a message and I can ask the panel your question. So I'm going to start where I think everybody has started in this world of immersive media by going back to our roots of traditional filmmaking, right? Maybe not for everyone, but maybe. We'll find out more. So just Martin, Gideon, and Kim-Leigh, obviously you could chime in on this one. Your background as a traditional filmmakers, both of you, and program making, why are you doing more and more interactive and immersive virtual reality experiences?
Well, I think as a filmmaker, every new medium and every new technology is a creative challenge, and it's an interesting addition to what's happened in the past. I mean, the films that I've made in the past have always been, certainly in natural history, there's always been a reliance on new cameras, new technologies. Can we see new behaviors? Can we tell a story visually in a new way with the new technology that's come out? My sort of way into this was through stereo filmmaking, so 3D, which in itself was a huge challenge in its own right. Coming into a setup where suddenly the cameras are too heavy to move. You have to think of whole new ways of bringing the drama, bringing the action in front of the camera, which opens up a whole new set of problems, but it's a kind of, they're problems that you can overcome in a positive way. And certainly with VR and other immersive ways of telling stories, if there's a way to engage an audience using technology, then why not? I mean, I think it's a really good way into that. It's a really good way to add to the story.
Well, we'll find out more about what you have been doing in that world. But Gideon, what about you? I mean, your background is working with brands in advertising world. How have you moved into the world of 360 and VR?
I think obviously as it became this popular thing, all brands started wanting to get involved in it some way, and because of it aligns them with this innovative look, and it allows them to communicate their brand in a different way and allow people to interact and experience it. I think as a filmmaker, it's nice to find a new technology and apply what you do know in this new basis, which I thought was quite interesting, and mainly just to keep up with technology and keep up with storytelling, and apply that same thought process.
We're going to find out more about how you actually managed to do that. And Kim-Leigh, you raised your eyebrows at me when I said you were a traditional filmmaking background. So tell me about how you've managed to find your way into this world.
So my background is in interactive TV. So many hundreds of years ago, when was that? 15 years ago, I used to do red button experiences where, for instance, for spooks, you'd have the broadcast program, and then the spooks experience that I designed was one where you'd get to train to become a spook. And it was full screen video, basically switching between two channels, but it was the beginnings of interactive narrative using full screen video. And I think VR's got quite a lot to, there's a lot of parallels with VR and branching narrative and getting users involved and participating in a narrative, all that kind of thing, so yeah.
Well, you touched on something that's absolutely vital, because at the end of the day, whatever you're making, there has to be a story, and there have to be characters in there. How are your experiences of creating interactivity, allowing your audiences to have a narrative, to experience a continuous flow of narration?
So I'm working on a drama, a VR drama at the moment, which is for a new broadcast series that's coming out later this year, called A Discovery of Witches, which is based on a book. So we're creating a VR experience where you can basically, it's an embodied VR experience where you can become some of the characters in the experience. And I mean, I can't tell you exactly what happens in it, but there's a narrative reason for you to be two of these characters, and it helps to tie in a multi-character plot into one narrative arc. And
Martin, Gideon, with your background in traditional filmmaking, how much of what you've learned over the years as filmmakers in the traditional world, how much of that is being applied to the art of making sort of immersive content?
I think it's a very good starting point to have. You've got to have a good story. You've got to sort of think about how the immersive, the interactive nature of the technology helps the story. My first experience moving on from 3D moving into VR and 360 was this 360 short film that we made called Fly Spy, and we did it deliberately to try and experiment with 360. It was a new thing that was coming out. It was sort of the next thing after 3D, and we were trying to think, well, how can 360 play a part in this story, in this narrative-driven drama that is, one step beyond just doing it for the sake of doing it at 360. So we actually designed a story that had a 360 element in it that would help tell the story. So the story is about a sort of genius deviant who invented a fly-sized drone so that he could stalk his ex-girlfriend effectively. So he would fly this drone from his bedsit into the air bricks of her house and see what she was up to. And every time you're in his point of view flying the drone, you're in a 360 world, which is because there were 360 cameras on the drone. So that was a way of using 360 to help tell the story. And it meant we could actually have a 2D version of the film. It meant we could have a 2D version of the film that people could watch in traditional formats, with this kind of wraparound fisheye element in the 2D space. Or you could watch it on a headset and then cut to, every time you're in the drone's point of view, you were in a 360 space. So you had this additional element to the storytelling. So that was just an example of trying to make the technology fit the story rather than what often happens, which is trying to find, stories to fit the other way around.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the things that I find is if you're going to be making a 360 film, a virtual reality experience, you don't want it to just feel like it's a gimmick, right?
Yeah.
So how do you stop that from happening? Is it interactivity? Is it is it the story? Is it the plot? Is it the execution of it? What stops something being a gimmick when you're making an immersive experience?
I think if you make something for VR, and my specialty is in 6 degrees of freedom rather than 360, where you have a body, where you have hands at least, and agency. And so I think whenever you create a narrative in that medium, it has to only be able to exist in that medium, otherwise you may as well do it in another medium. So then it's not a gimmick, because whatever you come up with has to exist in that. It has to have a reason to exist in VR, I think, otherwise you shouldn't be doing it in VR.
So your interactivity is the thing that drives it forward. But in terms of sort of traditional 360 filmmaking, how do you stop it from being contrived? How do you get your viewer to be interested in the things that you want them to be interested in when you make this film? We touched on it earlier when we were chatting beforehand. Is how do you guide them when you've got basically a bubble of video that you want them to explore?
My approach to that is I kind of peel off my vision into 5 areas and then almost like a heat map of interest, give my viewer like a sort of 270-degree view, so that I'm still controlling what they're seeing, but they've still got the freedom to look around. So I try not to make the environment too busy, so they're going to focus on what you're trying to show them. But then I think in order to stop it being a gimmick, what you're showing them has to be, like you said, something that can only be a virtual reality experience. I think wider applications like training and simulation, those kind of things, I think we'll see it live past its gimmick phase. But then you do get a lot of films that they could be a two-dimensional film and the experience is much the same, I think.
You work with a lot of brands making branded content in 360. How do your clients respond to the concept of having 360 films made for them, and how do they sort of interact with them when you're either pitching for them or presenting them to them in the end? And what are their experiences? What are your experiences of the way brands react to 360, basically?
My experience is a lot of brands want some 360 activity in order to keep up with the other brands. It becomes this competition, but I'm very reluctant to pitch films that aren't worthwhile 360 films. So the first one I ever made was one that I threw in as a side pitch. So I pitched a 2-dimensional version and a 360 version, and they did a lot of work around Nigeria in implementing a hand-washing program to reduce diarrhea, and they had these people who come back and go, we really loved being there. We went to India as a part of the volunteer scheme in the company, but we come back and you can't really convey that to people, what it's like, because everyone's seen sort of the children in need, cameras in slums, that kind of thing. Everyone's kind of used to that, so it's a way of finding a way of refreshing people's mind about the reality of those situations. And so, yeah, it was a pretty steep learning curve. I pitched that, they went for the 360 film, and then I had about 2 weeks to figure out how it worked before I was in Nigeria with a 360 camera, figuring it out on the fly. No Google Maps, no Google to help me out, figure out what's going on. But yeah, so that was, we made this experience for them, and then we brought that back and showed it to the staff, and they had a big uptake in their volunteer numbers and the money they could raise, because people could suddenly see for themselves what these environments were like. And I think for brands, that's the main thing, is spreading a message that is an experience. If that makes sense.
And how do you direct what is essentially a stage with people that you may not have ever worked with before, or people in the public? How does it work? We literally walk in with a 360 video camera, plonk it down, and expect them to ignore it. Is that how it works for you?
Pretty much. In Nigeria and India particularly the two areas I've had a lot of time spending making these films. There's a language barrier, there's a technological barrier. I can't exactly describe to them what 360 virtual reality film is. I'm just showing them a camera rig. But the way I approach it is, like I said, I create blocking zones, and obviously to avoid stitch lines and things, I have to get the blocking right, and then almost run them through it, give them areas of action. But I'm more just trying to capture what their lives like anyway. I'm not trying to get them to perform anything outside of their normal experience. And then I go and hide behind a wall, and fingers crossed they do what I've asked, and I see later.
But I guess as a result, in a way, because you're literally hiding behind a wall and you've just got this, what is it, a GoPro rig with how many cameras on it?
Yeah, it was 16 cameras on a GoPro rig, so it's 3D, stereoscopic 360 film.
Right, so when they've got over the shock of having this 16 rig GoPro unit set up, so I guess they're actually being more natural than they would have been had you been telling them to do something again and again.
That was the surprising thing. So we'd go to these sort of slums and put the camera up, and we also had a second unit filming traditional 2D content, just in case. And everyone would swarm around the guy with his camera and forget about the 360. Like, there's no one stood by it, they don't know it's on, they don't know what it is, and they just carry on their life. You get some nice little glances into the lens, but that all adds to it. And in a way, we've done a lot of these films around the world, and the authenticity from people's reactions and seeing what their lives are actually like without some tourist coming and visiting is quite amazing.
But when you're in an environment where you're dealing with the general public, and there's dealing with the general public, say in London, and then there's dealing with the general public in Nigeria. I imagine it's very different scenarios. How do you, as a director, when you're filming stuff, how do you know what's actually going on? Because you're either watching what's going on off camera. Is there any way for you to monitor? Have you ever had any experiences where you haven't actually noticed something going on that you should have done at the time?
I've had a few. So we had a nice little remote rig that linked to a much smaller 360 camera on the base of the tripod that we could kind of get a broken feed with. And we were hiding around the corner, and a local gang came, and they were quite interested in what was going on. But we have some plants within the scene because we're working with NGOs and things, so they take off their bright red t-shirt and a bit more. Does my mic on? That's there. And yeah, so a gang came up, and I'm just hiding around the corner, and I hear this commotion going on, and all of our, we obviously can't run in, or we ruin the scene, but we still want these kind of natural, because we want to talk about this kind of things, the youth and the problems of the area, so capturing that was quite nice. But yeah, it's a case of waiting around the corner and getting people to do things for you.
I mean, that's one way of capturing a VR experience.
Yeah.
Martin, obviously, your big recent VR moment was Hold the World with Sir David Attenborough. Tell us about that. Tell us about the project, how you did it, what it was about, how it worked.
Okay, well, so I was part of a team. The production company was Factory 42. They approached me because of my relationship with Sir David. I'd done several projects with him. And the ambition really was to harness, well, partly to harness David's kind of passion for new technologies. He's always got, he always wants to sort of see what's the next step is going to be. I mean, he's done all this stuff in 3D, well, color, HD, 3D, and then VR seemed to be the next thing for him. But what worked really well with it was the partnership between the Natural History Museum and David's, prestige, really, because his kind of motivation is to educate people. Really, he wants people to know how amazing the world is. I mean, every program he makes is about that. And what really excited him about the Hold the World project is that it took people into the Natural History Museum to see objects that often are too precious to even go on display. So it was a way to get objects in the vaults really to the masses. And for people who don't know the project, it's pretty simple in its concept, but it works really well. You sit across a desk from a hologram of Sir David in a Natural History Museum environment, and he interacts with you. So you have this one-on-one experience with David. He invites you to look in the drawers around you, and as you open the drawers, you can take out literally take out scanned objects from the museum, from a blue whale to a butterfly or a rare fossil, and these are all real objects that have been scanned in the museum. And then you have a very cool experience where he tells you about this object, and as you're looking at it, the headset will know if you're looking at the teeth, and he'll tell you about the teeth, or it'll, each kind of piece to camera from him, or each bit of narration is triggered by what you're doing. So it's highly interactive in that sense. And then at the very end of looking at the object, something cool will happen, like it'll animate, and if it's a blue whale, it'll get really big and swim off, and you can play with scale and all that sort of thing. There were lots of challenges with that project for the team. The first challenge for us as filmmakers is that it's not a linear experience. So it's not on rails. You can't tell the audience what they should be looking at next. It's the whole joy of it is the exploratory nature of it. So your question earlier about what turns how do you stop it being a gimmick is made harder in that environment if you don't. Because my answer to that would always be, well, make sure that the story keeps people engaged. But if the audience if the user is driving what happens next, you've got to make sure that every choice they make drives the story on for them and helps them feel like they're progressing in what they're doing. So a big technical challenge, not just in figuring out how to make sure that the story that you go through, whatever route you go down, is exciting and keeps you interested, but also technically. This involved taking David to a volumetric capture studio, filming him on a rig of 138 cameras around him, where every piece to camera which is kind of scripted into the interactivity of it, every piece of camera he delivers takes about 6 minutes just to save the clip, because there's so much information going through these cameras and into these banks of computers somewhere backstage, which I'm sure Kim-Leigh knows about. But for David, even for David, who's the kind of ultimate storyteller, who's done it for more decades than all of us put together, probably. That process of just remembering that it's not a linear story that you're telling is something you have to really get your head around and really have to sort of figure out. Okay, if somebody does that, then what happens here? And if they do something unexpected, like just throw the fossil, you kind of it's you can play with it as well. So if you just throw the fossil across the room or something, what happens then? It's all those sorts of elements you have to think about. So it's as a filmmaker, it's a really exciting creative process because you're kind of learning again. But as long as you stick to what you know in terms of the basics of telling a story and keeping people interested in what they're doing, what they're looking at, you're onto something really good, I think.
And how long does a project like that take from concept to delivery?
I think that was taken about a year. I can't quite remember.
It's taken a year.
Yeah. Just because a lot of it has been, Kim-Leigh probably knows more about the technical side at Sky, but it's designed to play on the Sky app, and I think the app was had to be remodeled and to accommodate this because there hadn't been anything interactive done until that had always been 360 linear films. So actually, the creation to the point of delivery is another technical challenge. How do people get to see it? And one of the really cool things about that particular project is the museum can have an installation where people can go and sit and do this, and they can sit in a room, but also it can be done at home. So for the museum, it's really exciting because objects that people can't even see in the museum can be seen on the other side of the world if somebody downloads it and looks at it. So for David, it sort of ticks that box. He's getting the message out there about these rare objects, and so I think as a kind of case study and doing something interactive, it works really well.
And I guess for Sir David, it was almost like a childlike joy of doing something like this, because I guess if he's able to picture the reactions that people will have when they experience this moment for themselves, is it something that he was just blown away by once it was done?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, he's obviously quite he's not boastful about who he is. He still gets kind of flattered when people are kind of think he's good at his job. Like, it's amazing to say, but part of the attraction for somebody downloading it is you get to sit in a room and have a one-to-one conversation with David. I mean, there's only so many things you can ask him, but or there's only so many things you can interact with him within the app. But you know, I think he kind of lost sight of the fact that a little bit that actually this is as much about giving people a ticket to have a one-on-one experience with him. You know.
And sorry, go on. I was going to say, sorry, Kim, just one last thing about this. As an installation, where is it playing? Is it on now? Is it around the world, or is it just in the Natural History Museum or whatever?
It was launching. It's launching within the next month, I think, in the Natural History Museum. I don't quite know the scale of the installation there yet, but yeah.
Fantastic. Sorry, Kim.
It is. It's launching in the next month. It's going to be the first thing that goes out on the Sky VR app when it goes out. David, there's some great footage of, I don't know if you've seen the Factory 42 footage of David Attenborough in VR with himself.
Oh, yeah.
It's brilliant. The first time he sees himself volumetrically captured, I mean, he's amazed. I mean, it's not like you want him to be doing a David Attenborough voice talking about David Attenborough, but it does get kind of surreal. Like, and yeah, just that, the ability for volumetric capture to capture a star, so to get somebody, you know, with incredible talent. He's so talented. And I remember when we were first doing some of the early tests with that footage, the creative director at Factory 42, Dan Smith,
yep.
he was the stand-in. He was like the test stand-in for, you know, before they got David in to test that the script is going to work out okay. And when Dan was in there, I mean, respect to Dan, but like when Dan was in there, you know, you kind of listen to him talking about stuff, and it's like, yeah, Dan. And you'd get a bit irreverent, you'd throw stuff around. And I remember DRI saying, oh, but you won't do that once, you've got to be respectful once Sir David Attenborough's in there. And I was like, he's just going to be a hologram. But it's true, once David Attenborough was in there, I found myself like sitting up straight and being like, yes, Sir David, like, you know, you react to him as if he's a real person. It's amazing. Like, the quality of holographic capture now with volumetric is just, I mean, it is quite mind-blowing. I really encourage everyone, if you get a chance, to see the Hold the World piece when it comes out, because it is the next level, I think.
Tell us about volumetric capture. I mean, I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with how it works or what's involved or what sort of workflows or crews or how long it takes. Give us a little overview, because that's kind of what you do day in, day out.
There's a lot of stuff. I mean, you know, pre-production and production and post-production all merge a lot more, I think, than they have been up until now. So, I mean, I would recommend really working out any interactive stuff very, very carefully beforehand, because it's very expensive. I mean, you can do lo-fi versions too. Maybe I should step back. So volumetric capture is when you have often a rig of cameras all around you and a sort of green screen cylinder, and you capture usually a person from all angles, and you can then create a mesh, a moving mesh out of them, and then project that video back into the mesh so that you can create a volumetric video of somebody, whether they're dancing or moving. You can walk right around them and they're there. So you can use that for augmented reality, you can use it for virtual reality, and you can walk right around them.
So is it like a hologram?
It's a hologram, yeah. But yeah, for instance, you can use it for 360 video, but it probably doesn't make as much sense to use it for 360, because you know, the benefit is to get that parallax when you walk around them and have them really in there. But yeah, it's very expensive because of all of the cameras, unless you do the lo-fi versions, which are also effective. But and the render times, I mean, like you say, just to get it to record takes a few minutes afterwards. But rendering, I mean, it takes weeks, you know, to get footage. Yeah.
And a little bit geeky, what sort of cameras do you use? Are there specialist cameras, or are they, you know,
I think they're pretty similar to GoPro.
There's lots of them.
There's just a lot, yeah. I think they're changing over soon, because Dimension have a studio, because I think, well, I know Sir David was shot in Seattle at the Microsoft rig, but now Dimension have opened one in Wimbledon, so that's, you know, it's two places in the world, really, that can do that. They're opening another one in Los Angeles at the moment. That's meant to be, I've heard that it's quarter of the size of a football field. Wow. I don't know how long's that render going to take. But yeah, amazing.
As a creative interaction director at Sky VR Studios, tell me about Sky VR Studios. What do they do? What's their commitment to VR? What's their plan?
I mean, I can definitely speak for myself and for Sky. So Sky's plan is to try and make innovative, great content to really push the medium forward. I mean, I think, for instance, the gaming community has made wonderful advances in VR. They've done great things with it, and everyone in film and TV have a lot to learn from the gaming industry. But at the same time, we also want to make sure that we can connect with a more mainstream audience. So a TV audience is not necessarily the same as a gaming audience. They don't necessarily have the same types of interactions that they'd be interested in, or exactly the same types of content. So Sky really wants to get VR out to a mainstream audience, a television audience. And they're just, the best way to do that is to make great content, as well as, helping with the physical hardware and the distribution and all of that. There's a lot of strands that need to come together in order for this to get out to a mainstream audience.
Well, this is something that prior to this panel, we were just sort of touching on as we were chatting about how do we make this immersive content or media or experiences mainstream, because everything's very personalised. You've got a headset experience to see Sir David. You can either watch what you guys do in a headset, or you can obviously go online and you can watch it as a rolling film. And what you do is obviously, I guess, primarily headset-based. How is Sky going to turn a virtual reality experience or an immersive experience into a television experience? How's that going to work?
I mean, there's a lot of things in the works that I can't say, but there's things that I can talk about. Say for instance, with David Attenborough, getting recognizable talent into it, because again, until volumetric capture happened, people were quite hard to represent realistically. It was all a bit uncanny, everybody looked a bit gamey, which is, not that there's anything wrong with gaming, but no star talent is really going to want to be represented that way, so it's hard to get them into VR. Whereas now that we've got that really photorealistic representation, you can get stars like David Attenborough, or this new series that we're working on for Discovery, for which is we can get the actual actors from the TV series presented in a way that truly represents them, so they're able to get involved that way. So yeah, getting recognisable talent in. What else can I talk about? Whether that's sports.
It's probably about getting the content on as many platforms as possible. So certainly mobile phones. We all get new mobiles every couple of years, whatever, and it doesn't seem to cost us anything. I mean, it does, but it doesn't. And if the mobiles are already have got the software on there that you can do some of this stuff. You can stick your phone in a cardboard headset, and you can start to enjoy some of this material. And I think I guess there are two versions of this. There's making it available to the mainstream at a low cost, but then there's probably what works quite well is when you've got a new exciting technology like this, then why not make it a premium experience? Something that people go to see, that they can a bit like going to the cinema or something. You go to a place where all of this is set up, and it's all bells and whistles, and you get this amazing experience that that you're willing to leave home to go and do. I think sometimes the mistake is trying to imagine that it's just like television that we all have on in our homes, and I think new technologies like 360 VR, it's difficult to imagine that'll ever be like that, because the technology is still quite expensive, and it's quite isolating. You put a headset on, and it's something you do either on your own or through connectivity over Wi-Fi or.
Exactly, you can get more than one person into an experience. You can have a social experience in there, so that it's not just you in a headset. There's a whole load of obviously Facebook Spaces, VR chats, if anyone's been in there, that's a lot of fun. All of these shared experiences I think are really compelling too.
Well, I guess that raises an important point. Just because it's immersive, does it mean it has to be an individual experience? We were talking, your Flyride stuff that you're doing at the moment is really interesting, because ultimately that is an immersive experience, but a shared one, and we're all gang people. We all want to experience things together. Tell us a little about what you're doing in China.
So these are bespoke cinemas that are being built in places in China. There's one we're just completing now, a film for this bespoke cinema in a national park in northeastern China. People go there anyway. They've got a high turnover of Chinese tourists who go to this park, and they want to see this park. And sometimes the weather's so poor they can't get up to the top of the volcano because there's clouds up there and so on. And so our brief was to sort of create this film that would give visitors to this park a wonderful kind of natural experience of the park. And so we designed a 5-minute film, which is to play on this flying theatre, which takes you on an aerial journey over the park, and you see the seasons coming and going, you see the wildlife, you get a journey all the way to the top, to this glorious heavenly lake at the top of this volcano. That's the reason people go to this park. And it's very much an immersive experience because the cinema itself is a giant screen dome setup, filmed in 8K. There are banks of seating in little pods of 10, 70 seats in all, and they're kind of staggered above each other. And the seats kind of lift up and project out, so you're sitting in front of this 180 cinema screen that wraps around you. So you look down and you see the tops of the trees, you look up, you see the clouds. And as you're flying through this space, there's also physical effects. So you go through clouds, mist, you can smell the pine as you go over the trees. And it's designed to be a bit of a thrill ride as well. So you plunge down into the canyon, so you get the kind of the thrill of that. And I would say that's completely immersive and really benefits from being able to sit next to your family and go there and do it with a friend, and you can talk to each other and you can share in the experience. And that's kind of what I mean by embracing the kind of premium end of this kind of medium, because I think something like that, if people want to go and do something really good, they can go out to an experience like that. And so all the same rules apply of telling a story. It's only a 5-minute film, but it's got there's a pre-show. You go into a little room, see a film that sets up the story. You're about to go on this journey. You're going to follow the flight of a falcon from a Manchu hunter who has it. So you get that set up, and then the whole building is arranged with it's themed. So you're kind of you're part of that story the minute you walk through the door and queue for your ticket. So I think as a kind of immersive experience, it's like giant screen 360 really. You can sit there with your friends and enjoy it. Yeah.
So I was going to say, do you think an immersive experience is heightened through sharing, or is an immersive experience heightened through literally being immersed through a headset? What would your take be on that?
I think all of the above. It depends what it is. Sometimes just being with your friends in an environment, that is the experience, because you just, watching something together, maybe you have a dynamic experience because you chat with your friends, and then that'll make you want to come back and do more of that. But it's kind of distracting as well. I mean, it's you'll just end up mucking about and laughing around and doing whatever you want. If you want a more immersive, as in narrative experience, then perhaps you need to control it a little bit more. Personally, I think immersion is about embodiment, and it's about having how you are represented inside VR, which is why I'm much more interested in 6 degrees of freedom. So if you've got hands and you have agency, if you're able to have an effect on the environment or the story or the other characters, that to me is what immersion is about.
What about you, Martin? What do you think?
Sorry, give me the question again. Zoned out there.
Is it better to be immersed as an individual or immersed as a group activity?
I mean, I totally agree with Kim-Leigh. It's I mean, it's you make the most of whatever the technology can give you. So I mean, I think if you could, we're social animals, so part of the joy of watching television is commenting on what you're watching with your family, and that applies in any immersive experience as well. If you can share an experience with somebody, it's a better experience for it. But if you want to be kind of having a one-on-one with David Attenborough, why not? I mean, that works really well. Or, you're focusing on a very unique experience, and it's great to feel like you're the only person in the room. So I mean, it's horses for courses in many ways, and much like creating any content, I think it's sort of you go for the best of what it is.
Yeah. One other thing, I've got some questions in, but one question that's going to pop up in a sec, which is quite pertinent to what you've just done with your Flyride stuff. How do clients? I mean, obviously these guys are paying money for you to do this. how do you sell it into them? How do they get it? How do they react to your ideas? And because it's not easy to understand sometimes these things, is it?
It depends. Yeah, it depends on the background of the client. I mean, often, Gideon will have lots of experience in this in the branded sector, but certainly with the stuff we've been doing in China, we're kind of having to educate our client from the very beginning of what it is. So right down to negotiating the budget, for example. It's well, you could do it for this much, or you could do it for this much, and it would be really good. But actually, trying to explain what really good is really hard if somebody hasn't been through that process, and they don't. The assumption is that people know about even how to make a film and the kind of the stages of making a film. But when you add to that the complications of brand new technologies, it's most people are like, whoa, and they kind of have to. You have to build. It's all about trust, really. They have to understand that what you're going to give them is something really good for the best possible price, and it's going to really work for their target audience. And if you get that trust, then that's the answer, I think.
And Gideon, so I've got a question here which is very pertinent to that. Is when you're pitching, who do you know who to approach about pitching 360 content when it comes to brands, and how do you pitch them? Or do they come to you with ideas that they know that you can fulfill because of your experiences?
It's mostly pitching through a problem, so our clients will come to us with a problem, and then we'll provide a video solution to that. So it all happens very organically depending on what they're trying to achieve, because the last thing we want to do is give someone a 360 film that doesn't fulfill anything for them. They can't, as we said, it's much more difficult to share them and generate an audience. So if you're going after a big audience, VR, and you've got quite a small budget, VR is not going to help you out. But having said that, it's a great engagement tool, obviously. And so lots of how do you pitch it? It's what they want, I guess.
We're slowly running out of time, or quickly running out of time actually. A couple more questions, but I think the biggest one here, and which is probably going to take us to the end, is we'd like to get your views on what's next for immersive technology. What are your predictions? What are your hopes? What would you like to see? What would you like to invent? What do you think? What's going to happen over the next 5 years, say, with immersive content or media?
I think volumetric is a massive trend that's going on now. So I think that'll start to become a lot more commonplace. Obviously, I would say interactive and fully immersive, as well as augmented experiences. Once we can start getting rid of the tethers on the headsets, the Santa Cruz headsets coming out apparently next year, and by all reports, it's really amazing. So once we've got that freedom to not have really massive cabled experiences where you're stuck to a PC, that'll really help. But yeah, for me, it's all about interaction, embodiment, those kinds of new kinds of storytelling where the participant gets to almost collaborate in the story. I think that's what makes it different. That's what sets it apart from linear storytelling, is allowing the audience to not just be an audience anymore, they become a participant. And that to me is really exciting.
What about you, Martin?
I'm really excited about the way technology is going. When the headsets aren't tethered anymore, and even when backpacks go and it's all small enough that it's in the headset, when there will be more of an ability to have a kind of mixed reality experience where you'll go to a place, the world will, you'll be immersed in an environment, and you can go there with a friend and you can see them in that room. At the moment, you can you can see avatars of your friend, but when that becomes maybe with volumetric capture, when you go there with your buddy and you can do something really cool, go on this adventure together, and come out the other side and have done that, I think that would be really exciting. So
like a shared VR headset experience where you're with your friends, but it's almost like real-time volumetric capture, so you can see them in the same. Yeah, that'd be awesome, wouldn't it? Yeah. What about you, Gideon? What are your hopes for the future?
I think the same hardware. It'd be nice to see the hardware become a little less cumbersome and a little bit more widely used. It'd be nice to see people having it as an alternative to television. We've got television sets having a little VR something or other that you could use as a group. But a couple of weeks ago I went to the Star Wars experience. Have you been to that? It's great. It's like Quasar crossed with virtual reality. So you can go in there with your friends. You're all stormtroopers. You can see your hands, make obscene gestures, and run around. grab guns and shoot, and it's a really interesting experience. I'd like to see more of those in different places. Like I can see that really becoming like a theme park where you could change it into a completely different theme park every 2 years or for different people, and those kind of experiences I think could be extremely popular.
I'd like to see that, but with maybe some more gentle narrative experiences where we didn't have to shoot everything all the time.
Yeah.
That'd be nice.
Yeah, exactly. Something like
Well,
that.
we've run out of time. Thank you very much, the three of you, for joining us on the panel. It's been really interesting. I hope you found it interesting, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.